The other one that I want to start with first here is James Harden's quotes about what would happen if he had stayed in OKC. He says, this is a quote from GQ, an interview with them, that it was basically, quote, destined for them to win a title, that being the Thunder, if he had stayed in OKC. Rick, I know that you disagree with that. I want to ask Perk first. Perk was obviously there, went to the finals with this team. Let's get Perk stuff first, and then we'll get your opinion there last, Rick. Perk, what do you think? Is he right? Do you guys believe if he had stayed, if they had not made that trade, do you guys win a title in OKC?
I don't know. I don't believe so. Here's the thing. Here's the thing right here, Ceruti. Now James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and Kevin Durant are mature. When I got there, those guys were babies. They were still trying to find themselves and find their way. And I don't even know why this is a conversation. I don't even know why James Harden even answered this question, because he didn't want to be there anyway. He wanted his own team. He wanted a max deal. He wanted to run. Yes, he wanted to run his own ship. So I don't even know. Oh, if I would have stayed, James, you didn't want to stay. Like, you wanted your own team, and rightfully so. You deserve your own team, because if you would have stayed, you wouldn't have been the player that you are today. Like, you wouldn't have won the MVP. You probably wouldn't have made it to multiple All-Star games. You probably wouldn't have made hundreds of millions of dollars staying in Oklahoma City, and you wouldn't have sacrificed it at the age of 22 or 23 years old, James, and he knows that. So I don't even know why he even answered that question, because he knew that was never going to happen. So don't answer that like, oh, it was, all of a sudden it was OKC fault why this team didn't stay together. No, James, you wanted your own team. You came back from the Olympics, and all these guys influenced you and told you that you was a number one option, and you wanted your own team, and that's that. And that's the truth behind it.
Well said.
Thank you, Perk. Thank you so much for saying that. And I blame Bill Simmons for this whole narrative that they could have kept James Harden, because in order to give Daryl Morey shine for making the deal, he's like, oh, look, the Daryl and the Rockets pilfered Harden from the Oklahoma City Thunder. The money wasn't that different. James didn't want to be there. He was a sixth man in OKC. And forget about, like, should you move Russell or should, move Russell instead of James? KD was there. KD was the guy who was soaking up most of the oxygen in the room in Oklahoma City. And James was ready to be a star and have his own team. So this whole idea that Oklahoma City somehow screwed up because they shouldn't have traded James. James didn't want to stay in Oklahoma City. That's the bottom line. And they knew that. So they said, you know what? Let's make the best deal we can that's going to give us picks. It's going to continue to give us some flexibility moving forward. And we'll build around Russ and KD. And I also keep in mind, like, at that time, now we look at it now, we think, okay, in the small ball era, you wouldn't have a problem playing with James, Russell, and KD. Well, that was a time where you still needed size. You still had the Memphis Grizzlies with Zach and Marc Gasol. You still teams.
Rick, that's what they had Perk for. Come on, Perk. That Perk was there. Come on, now that's our boy right there. He was holding up.
But I'm saying you had to have that, and you had to have Perk, and you had to have Serge Ibaka. Like, you had to have size, and you had to have quality size on the front line. You couldn't invest all your money in KD, Russ, and James. So whether James wanted to stay or not, I mean, look, they were left with having James guard LeBron James in the finals. That's where they were defensively. Whether that was smart or not, we can go back and forth. But bottom line was, like, you had to be able to defend size at that time in the league. It wasn't until the Warriors came along, like a year, 2 years later, and then this whole idea that they would have won a championship. Okay, well, they still would have had to go through Golden State in their prime to be able to get it done. And I just never really, like, Clay, Steph, Draymond, those pieces fit. Their games complement each other. I never felt like Russ, James, and KD fully could integrate and get the most out of what they were individually playing collectively.
No, and you're right. And two more things. One, let me tell y'all this. Oklahoma City offered James, I forgot how many years, but it was $68 million, right? They gave him time to sign the deal. He did not. And they were forced to trade him. So that's why they made the trade to Houston. He signed with Houston. His first contract was $80 million. So you're talking about a $12 million difference, Ceruti. So, like, if he wanted to stay, like, $12 million, it's nothing that you could do it's nothing you can't do with 68 that you could do with 80 million. It's not like it was 50 versus 100. You're talking about a small difference in $12 million. I know that's a lot of money to a regular person, but I'm saying, like, when you're talking about him making a sacrifice, like, come on now, he really didn't want to be there. Period, point blank. He wanted his own team. Let's stop with all this BS, because that's not what it is. Like, and think about this. They could have won a championship without James, right? Let's not forget that the Thunder was up 3-1 on the Golden State Warriors and should have won that series and probably would have got to the finals and probably would have beat the Cavaliers, in my opinion. So let's not act like they could have not accomplished anything without James Harden.
I totally agree. I think the post-Harden era, I think that team, the 3-1 team that you're talking about, if they had stayed together, I think they probably win a title. I don't know. I'm kind of with you guys. I'm not sure the Harden team does or doesn't. I agree with you, Rick. The pieces didn't necessarily fit. The one thing I wanted to ask you, Rick, though, is like the financial aspect of this, because I think Sam Presti still does get some blame for this, probably wrongfully so, because it was always like, oh, well, they didn't want to be a luxury tax team, right? And they would have had to pay all these guys. It would have been $70 million. But here's the thing that I don't understand. Though, is that they gave that money to Enes Kanter like 2 years later. And then they were also a luxury tax team 4 of the last 5 years, including last year. They were the highest luxury tax team in the league. So either they miscalculated the cap rise, which I think a lot of other teams did see coming, so I don't know how that would work out, or they had a massive change in their strategy about how they were going to spend their money. So do you know the answer to that? Because it doesn't seem like spending was an issue 2 years later.
Well, but part of it was at that time is that they were locking in long-term deals. Like, they looked at these deals that they made with Ennis and other guys, and those were still movable contracts. They were still confident that they were going to maintain a certain amount of flexibility. The concern was, we're going to sign James, KD, and Russ all to long-term deals, and now we don't have any ability to get better unless we break apart these three pieces. So why are we putting them together in the first place? And from what I know, there was already concern at that point that, like, we gotta be able to prove to KD in particular that we have the ability. If we fall short, we have the ability to get better. So maintaining young talent, draft picks, maintaining a certain amount of flexibility was going to be important to convince KD that if they didn't win a championship, you know what? Well, we have the wherewithal to, because look, the fact of the matter was, you can protect the cap space, but you're not going to attract. They always knew Oklahoma City wasn't going to attract free agents. You can have all the cap space you want. You're not going to be able to get somebody who willingly is going to look at that team, especially if you're top heavy with stars, that they're going to come in and say, yeah, I want to come in there. I'll take less to play in Oklahoma City and not touch the ball. That wasn't going to happen. So there was a combination of things that was going on, but the later contracts that they signed guys too. The feeling was we can always get off of these. And I think the feeling was that if we sign these three guys long term, now we're stuck with what we have.
It's always fascinating to look at the revisionist history of this stuff because, and it shows how fragile sort of the team building in the league is where, in 2012, they make the finals at Oklahoma City Thunder team. And I think everyone's like, oh, pencil this team into the finals for the next 5 years. They never make it back. Right. It's amazing how that really works out.